Welcome to the Friday Happy Hour with victory strategist, award-winning author and your happy hour host, Annmarie Kelly. Each week, Annmarie chats with women who have reinvented, started over or wrote fabulous next chapters. They share how they overcame their midlife challenges and how you can too. So kick back with some good happy hour something to drink and enjoy today's show.
Welcome. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour with me, Annmarie Kelly. I'm that recovering good girl and your victorious woman empowerment partner. And this is for us victory chicks and you guys who care about us. Meet on Fridays to chat about things we can do to achieve our goals, overcome our challenges, and get empowered so our lives can sparkle. Thanks for joining me today at Happy Hour. Okay, we're into February, the love month. So this month we're focusing on things of the heart. And I've been reading a fascinating book. It's about narcissism. And if you've ever had anything to do with a narcissist, you know that's one of those things that can get in the way of a good love connection. The book is by Dr. Craig Malkin. And he's here today to talk about this interesting book. It's called Rethinking Narcissism, The Secret to Recognizing and Coping with Narcissists. He's an interesting take on the topic, and I think you'll find him as interesting as I do. So he'll be here shortly. Well, it's been quite a week. Not so much for me, but for the country. Well, wait a minute. I've had quite a week with technology. It kind of mirrors what's happening in the country. I'm trying to get the rest of the 5-year marriage written, and to my editor, but it's been one of those weeks when everything's been upside down. My email, my PC, even my tablet. And that's practically brand new. But they're all in an uproar, just like half the country. And they're both disturbing me. So our new president is going full bore on keeping us the promises he made during the campaign. And that makes half the country happy, and the other half crazy out of their minds. And what President Trump said this week is absolutely true. He said it's the first time, and I don't know if he meant it in history or in a long time, but either way, it's the first time a politician got into office and actually set an agenda based on campaign promises. I guess we're not used to that. What's not so good is that half the country that's not for Trump, it just isn't just not happy. They're incensed. Well, and I know some of that's not so unusual. Like whoever's in office, when it was Bush, half the country was ticked. When it was Obama, half the country was ticked. And now it's Trump and half the country's ticked. I think that's typical, and it doesn't matter who's in office. And if Hillary had won, the other half of the country would be ticked off now. But this other stuff, two of Joseph's conservative clients said they were getting off Facebook because they think it's gotten to be too much, whatever's going on Facebook. I was on it the other night, and I was like, wow. And some of the other people who are posting the too much stuff are their friends, and they're also Joseph's clients. So he hears it from both sides when they come in for a massage. So on Tuesday night, I was talking to my cousin, excuse me, and she said she's really scared. And she's worried that everything is building up into a rage that would result in a rage that could result in violence. I could sort of see her point when we were talking, but I didn't see it resulting in violence until the very next night. And that's when some guy from Breitbart News had trouble at Berkeley College, Berkeley in California. He was supposed to speak there, but protesters came out to stop him. And, those kids can protest. That's okay. We're allowed to do that. But they have no right to get violent and cause the event to be canceled. Nobody was being forced to go to it. Nobody had to go. wasn't like an accredited class or anything. And the way I see it, those protesters cheated the other kids out of going and hearing what this Breitbart guy had to say. Now, while the protesters were justified to exercise their First Amendment rights, they weren't justified to take away the First Amendment rights of an auditorium full of their peers. They just, that they think that they have the right to do that is kind of scary. And, that's been happening more and more. I've been seeing it over the years. If you don't like the ideology of the speaker, you shut them down. It's a bad sign for our democracy. And to happen at Berkeley, Berkeley, the place that's supposed to be the home of free speech, free speech is like their cultural legacy. What happened is a true 180 from that. And the president of that college should be concerned because apparently at Berkeley, they aren't about free speech anymore, but only about approved speech. In a place where kids need safe zones for when they get their feelings hurt, where are the safe zones for people who don't disagree with the safe zone kids? And if the only way they know how to disagree with someone's opposing viewpoint is violence or to shut them down, how are they going to get along in the workplace or in the world? Well, then yesterday I was watching CBS, The Morning Show, and I listened to pollster Frank Luntz talking with Charlie Rose, and Charlie Rose said, well, this feels like the country's unraveling, is it? And Frank Luntz said that he thought that it was. He said, he's that pollster, and he, does those groups, focus groups. And he said that the good part of the process is when people are standing up and speaking out. Oh, we love that. As Americans, we love that, even when we disagree with the viewpoint. But what's happening lately, he said, with the language and the tone is bad. And he warned, and I'll quote him, there's no sense of self-editing, no sense of shame or going too far, end quote. And that is scary. Now, I'm wondering, if you think your way is the only right way because you're so special that it has to be, I'm wondering if that's a form of narcissism. And I'm going to ask Dr. Craig Malkin when he gets here. Anyway, that happened on Wednesday night, and the protests erupted in violence. So I could see what my cousin Miriam was saying. It sort of validated her fears. But by comparison, on Thursday morning, the networks gave considerable time to another gathering of people in Punxsutawney, PA, waiting for Punxsutawney Phil to do his Groundhog Day thing. It was a huge crowd of people, and I'll bet they were both liberals and conservatives in that crowd, and they all had one goal, to see Punxsutawney Phil and to find out if he was going to see his shadow and if we would have 6 more weeks of winter or not. I always watch that because of my mom. For my whole life, she got such a kick out of Groundhog Day, and I can remember as a kid, it was 5 out of 7 days, or it was a school day, coming downstairs for breakfast and my mom announcing that we were going to have 6 more weeks of winter, or not. But, and I have to tell you, sometimes I think I'm sort of a slow learner. It took me years to realize that Groundhog Day is the beginning of February, exactly 6 weeks before spring. Did you ever think about how we don't look for Punxsutawney Phil's prognostications on New Year's Day or wait until President's Day? No, it's always February 2nd. The first time I figured that out, I felt so duped. Then I thought how clever it was for some smart business person to think up Groundhog Day 130 years ago and bring business into the city. I read that for a few days in Punxsutawney. It's a tiny town in west central Pennsylvania. Hotel rates skyrocket, and the average visitor spends $200, and more if it's on a weekend. And it brings in about $5 million to the local economy. That's some big bucks, huh? And at Punxsy Phil's Cakes and Steaks, try that 5 times fast, they report that they have 5 times their usual crowd on Groundhog Day. We should think about something like that here in Westchester. It would be good for our economy. And that's not all. The Chamber of Commerce said since the movie came out, Groundhog Day, people from all over the world visit Punxsutawney all year round. And that movie wasn't even filmed in Punxsutawney. It was filmed in Woodstock, Illinois. And do you know that Punxsutawney is about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh and about 2 hours south of the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon? So I was thinking, if you wanted a driving adventure, you could actually spend a few days going to from Westchester, Pennsylvania, to Pittsburgh, going west to Pittsburgh, going north to Punxsutawney, continuing on to the Grand Canyon in Wellsboro, and then on to New York to Watkins Glen, where you could watch NASCAR races and hike that beautiful state park there. That would be fun. And, you know, except for Punxsutawney, I've been to all those places, and they're all worth spending a couple of days. So if you're thinking of a little summer travel idea, that's a good one. Of course, don't be thinking about it too soon, because, you know, Punxsutawney Phil said there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter, and you may still be shoveling some snow this winter. So listen, it's time to go for a break. But before we go, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest, Dr. Craig Malkin. In addition to being the author of the book I've been reading, Rethinking Narcissism, The Secret to Recognizing and Coping with Narcissists, Dr. Malkin is a clinical psychologist and a lecturer at Harvard Medical School, and he's appeared in and been featured by a ton of cool places, including Time Magazine, NPR, and the Oprah Winfrey Network. And now he's here with us at Happy Hour. So listen, go get some good happy hour, something to drink, and when we come back, Dr. Craig Malkin will be here with us. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour.
Remember when you wished you had more time for yourself, and now you have it, but you notice you're keeping busy with stuff, but that stuff isn't making you feel happy or filled up? And when you think about what would make you happy and filled up, you get stuck or feel overwhelmed. And then you go back to what's more familiar, more comfortable, even if it's not making you happy. Wouldn't you love to find a way to start making sense of that deep discontent you're feeling? Well, you're not alone. I'm Annmarie Kelly, author, victory strategist, and the radio show host of the Friday Happy Hour. And I know there's a place for you, one that other women have found to be both inspirational and empowering, and it's the Victorious Woman Project. Go there now and get on my mailing list, where you'll be the first to know about my upcoming online workshops, teleseminars, and more. And while you're there, take a couple minutes to look over my blog. You can download some of the free stuff I have for you and let it get your creative juices going. I'm looking forward.
But before we go, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest, Dr. Craig Malkin.
victoriouswoman.com.
Welcome back to the Friday Happy Hour. I'm Annmarie Kelly, and I'm here with Dr. Craig Malkin. Welcome, Dr. Craig. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Annmarie?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
How are things in Philly?
Things are pretty good. Listen, it's later. Every day it gets a little bit later, so I'm a happy woman.
I'm glad. I was listening to your earlier segment, and I had the thought, if Punxsutawney Phil knew how much was riding on him, would it go to his head?
He'd be like a narcissist, huh?
Right.
You know, Craig, I found you when I was doing some supporting research for my new book, and I was intrigued by your work, and particularly your book, Rethinking Narcissism. And I have to tell you that not only is it an easy read for such a complicated subject, but you give narcissism both a hard look and a soft touch. But you come by your interest in narcissism honestly. Would you tell my listeners how you started getting interested in narcissism?
Absolutely. There's a joke that we had in graduate school, research is me search. Mm-hmm. And it definitely fit in my case because my mother was extraordinarily narcissistic, and I struggled with the form it took when I was younger and she was younger. I didn't really notice because basically I became her caretaker, and I didn't really say anything wrong with that. It was really only as I got older and eventually wound up getting interested in psychology in undergraduate and then in graduate school and then in my advanced training at Harvard Medical School, where I really started to put the pieces together and think about the way a lot of her behavior could be explained by narcissism, in particular extreme narcissism.
You know, when I read that part in your book, I thought, and now I understand why you gave narcissism such a loving look. You know, I thought that was interesting, and you came to understand that narcissism, and I'll quote this, that what you wrote, a habit people use to comfort themselves, and I love that because that made it seem like they weren't bad people, you know, but it was something that they do when they feel scared or sad or lonely.
Absolutely. What I wanted everybody to understand in Rethinking Narcissism, when you start to look at the research, first of all, for all your listeners out there, you need to understand that narcissism is not a disorder. Narcissist is not a diagnosis. The only diagnosis we have in mental health is narcissistic personality disorder, and we can certainly get into that. But what all kinds of narcissism, what they all have in common is this drive to feel special. And if you start to think of it kind of like a drug, the way people who become dependent on alcohol might soothe themselves when they feel sad or scared or lonely, instead of turning to relationships, things start to make a little more sense. And you can think of people who are narcissists, that is, people who are higher than average in traits of narcissism, as people who are addicted to feeling special or dependent on it. And then if they get addicted enough, they might lie, steal, cheat, do whatever it takes to get their high, just like anyone who's addicted. And then you start tipping into pathology, and that's narcissistic personality disorder. But narcissism itself really is best understood as this pervasive human tendency, a drive to feel special that can become dangerous.
And the thing that you wrote this story, you wrote about this time with your mother and the Manolo Blahnik shoes, and that's when you got this big piece of understanding. Will you share that story with my listeners?
Absolutely. Just shortly after my father died, we had to up and move everything. I had to clear out the townhouse they lived in and move my mother to a place that she could afford that was nearby my now wife. We weren't married at the time, but my wife and myself. And my mother just fell into one of those states where she just could not face really what she saw as a fall from grace, where she didn't feel special anymore. She was extremely attractive when she was younger, and she got a lot of attention, and as she got older, the looks that she depended on started to fade. There was more to her than that, but unfortunately not often in her mind. And so she started to become very self-involved, and around the move, she wasn't really helping that much. She was sort of obstinate and angry and critical of everything that we did. And then at one point, as we're unpacking boxes, she sort of goes off in a huff, and she goes into the back room, and she comes back wearing these Manolo Blahniks, these, I don't know, they were like 3-4-inch stilettos, and clomping around in her apartment. And she said, and then she said, "There, that's much better. At least my shoes help me. At least my shoes make me feel special." Right? And she was English. My attempt at her British accent, it gets better as I go. So it was at that moment I had this insight. It's like, okay, she can't talk about how upset she is about this or how scared of her reasons that had to do with how she was raised. And instead she relies so much like somebody who depends on a substance for soothing. Instead of turning to my wife or I for comfort, she found some way to feel special. It was just so starkly clear in that moment that she was clomping around in those shoes, literally above both of us, that was the way that she did it.
So when I read that, Craig, I thought to myself, wow, that makes it seem like I felt so sorry for your mother, and I felt so sorry for anybody that I know who I think is narcissistic, because of the people that I know who I think are. They're the loud, boisterous kind. And you talk about 3 different kinds of narcissists. And one of them is that, and I'm not remembering the name that you call the loud, boisterous one.
The loud, boisterous kind of narcissism is you're referring to the 3 types that I review in Rethinking Narcissism. These are from the research. Again, you want to think of these are traits. This is not a disorder. When it becomes far enough along in the spectrum, and hopefully we can talk about that at some point, say extremely narcissistic, that's when you get into disorder. But most people are under the impression, if you talk to them, if you mention the word narcissist or narcissism, they think of a loud, chest-thumping braggart, reality TV types. But that's a caricature, because not all narcissists care about looks or fame or money. I call that type that we know so well, the narcissist we all know and loathe, I like to say, an extroverted narcissist, because they're the more outgoing, they tend to be more sociable. But there are 2 other types, and we might identify more, because there's lots of ways to feel special. That is, like you stand out from the other 7 billion people on the planet in some way. Introverted narcissists tend to feel special based on their pain. They might feel like the most misunderstood person in the room. They tend to be quiet and more introverted, as their name suggests. They agree with statements like, I have problems that nobody else can understand. You see, this is very different from somebody who's loud and bragging all the time. And then there's a 3rd kind called communal narcissism, and these are people who literally agree with statements like, I'm the most helpful person I know. So if you get too hung up on these signs that people are obviously arrogant and loud, then you miss signs of trouble that have nothing to do with, say, vanity or greed. It comes in all different forms. And that's one of the major rethinks of Rethinking Narcissism, is to help people recognize the common core, particularly when it becomes disordered, when it becomes pathological. That is, as I said, I view it like an addiction. These are people who are addicted to feeling special.
Well, and before you answer that question, you mentioned the spectrum. And let's talk about that, because I thought that was really interesting. And on one end, you have something called dark narcissism. And on the other end, you refer to another trait, I guess you would call it a trait, that I'd never heard of before. It was called egoism.
I coined that term, one of the things that I did is that we've always had, as psychologists, for as long as we've had this idea of narcissism, people have thought in terms of a spectrum. And most of the time the spectrum is thought of as you start with degrees of bad, and then you go all the way up to the worst expressions of narcissism, cold-hearted, lacking empathy, something called malignant narcissism. The problem is that there's also this idea, we have 4 different measures, including our own at this point, and decades of writing about what's called healthy narcissism. And we know from the research that the vast majority of people around the world feel, when they're happy and healthy, a little bit special, exceptional, or unique. They don't feel average. And that when people feel that way, they feel more optimistic, they feel they're more likely to persist in the space of failure. In our research, we found they're better able to give and receive in relationships. They can be more empathic. So that little bit of feeling special, sort of seeing yourself through slightly rose-colored glasses, that's what you want to think of as healthy narcissism. I put that in the center of the spectrum. I put disordered narcissism all the way at the far right, if you will. And then on the left, we have the people who have not been named. This is something I struggled with. I wanted people to have language where Echo was the nymph who was cursed to repeat back the last few words that she heard in the story of Echo and Narcissus. And like Narcissus fell in love with his reflection, Echo fell in love with Narcissus. You want to think of as Echo as a back of those rose-colored glasses. These are people who are afraid to stand out in any way, who have been made to feel it's dangerous to strive for any kind of special attention. They're afraid of seeming narcissistic in any way. They may hate their needs because they agree with statements like, I'm afraid of becoming a burden, or I'm not sure what I want or need from relationships. So you really want to picture somebody who handles their fear of losing someone, if you will, by trying to take up as little room as possible in a relationship. That is egoism at the extreme. And what we found in our research is that people who are egoists, if you will, and you think of it more like a style, all of these things, they're the most warm-hearted of the three groups that we looked at, which were egoists, people with healthy narcissism, and extreme narcissists. So they may worry about being a burden, but they're extremely warm-hearted. And why is that important? Because it turns out that people who struggle with egoism tend to fall in relationships just like Echo did with extremely narcissistic friends and partners. And I wanted to help people like that.
You know, Craig, we have to take a break, but let's pick up right there when we come back. And everybody hang tight. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour.
Hi, this is Annmarie Kelly, author, victory strategist, and the radio show host of the Friday Happy Hour. I trust you're enjoying my conversation with this fabulous guest. If you're getting inspired with ideas and feeling empowered, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more for you. Tips, downloads, resources at the Victorious Woman Project. Go to victoriouswoman.com and look around and get on my mailing list so you can be the first to know about the newest good things I have for you. That's www.victoriouswoman.com.
Welcome back to the Friday Happy Hour. I'm Annmarie Kelly, and I'm here with Dr. Craig Malkin, and we're talking about rethinking narcissism. So, Craig, before we went to break, we were talking about that the egoism, and I don't know if it seems to me, and maybe it's just because most of the work I do is with women, that seems to be really prominent with a lot of women. And especially, there was one story you talk about where the woman poured all of herself into her kids. And then when the kids were too old, when they got old enough to leave, she didn't know what to do with herself. Do you find that a lot in your practice?
Absolutely, I do. What's interesting is when we started looking at the research, I think this is going to change as my colleagues and I get more data, but we didn't find a gender difference in egoism, or rather it was a slight one. It wasn't huge. Now, the reality is often there's not huge gender differences in research, but maybe a little actually translates into a lot. Most of the people I see in my practice who struggle with egoism are women. And the woman that I spoke about that you're referring to, it's a classic example. This is what happens if you're so uncomfortable with your needs. One way of distracting from them is something called reversal. Sort of think of it a turning of the table with needs. I'm going to focus on other people's needs and take care of them. That way I can distract from my own needs. And also it sustains me, and this isn't the kind of narcissistic martyrdom that you see, say, in a more self-sacrificing narcissist. People who struggle with egoism often aren't even sure if they should be recognized for what they're doing. It feels more like obligation, or just if they take it for granted, just as others might take them for granted. But they wind up focusing on other people's needs instead of themselves. And then when their caretaker role shifts, because say the kids grow up, now they're left with themselves. And especially if they have a partner who took up all the room, which isn't unusual, what do they do with that uncomfortable experience of they've got no one to focus on when they're aware that they might need more, or there's something missing from their marriage? And that's where I have to step in and help people. So a big part of Rethinking Narcissism is helping people who struggle with egoism, as I did early in life, develop more of a voice to be able to express all of those submerged needs of feelings.
I love that, because you say that in Rethinking Narcissism, where you say that if you have egoism, then you need to find your voice. You need to make that investment in yourself to figure out what it is that you want. And I see that so often with women. They want something more. They want something different. They want something better. But they don't even know what it is, because they have for so long not even thought about themselves.
Exactly. You can't have a vocabulary, let alone speak about what it is that you want, what your needs are, if you've spent very little or no time there, like a place that you would visit. You have no description of it. So a big part of what I help somebody who struggles with egoism do is start to elaborate on what are their preferences and to be comfortable with them. Somebody like this is often very good at shifting quickly away. It makes them anxious, in fact, because the message they got, often these are women who were neglected, or they might even have been abused, that to have attention is somehow dangerous, right? If you're the focus in a family where there's put downs or abuse, or your feelings are shoved aside like they don't matter, then it feels safer just not to be seen at all.
Sure, you're like flying under the radar.
Yes, keep a low profile. Do not stand out, whatever it takes. Make sure you don't stand out too much. You can see how quickly this begins to mirror narcissism, where you have one person who has a strong need to feel special and another person who's afraid of special attention.
Yeah, I can see that, and when you're looking on either side of the spectrum, as you have it, and don't think I didn't take the test, Craig. And we'll tell my listeners how they too can take the test, but I did the one that was that was right in the book.
The longer form and everything, yeah.
Just to see where I fell on the narcissism spectrum, and I thought it was really interesting that how you have that figured out, because what you say is that we all have that propensity for narcissism.
I think it's inborn, in the sense that no one wants to feel like they're just one of the tiny dots in the universe. Well, at least sometimes we all want to feel a little bit like a star. Say if you're bucking for promotion in a job, it helps to have a little bit of that. If you're say going to go on the radio and host a show, or say you're going to write a book, or you're going to run for office, or things like that, you have to at least have some faith that you have a little something more, at least until you can prove that you do. And that's a big part of what helps people cope. That's why I think there's this cross-cultural, this is not just in Western cultures. We're talking places like China. Again, there's lots of ways to feel special. In other words, lots of ways to feel like you stand out from the rest of the 7 billion people on the planet. So it all depends on what you value about the self. In more communal cultures, more group cultures like China and other Asian countries, what they value is feeling like they contribute to the group. So their narcissism might take a different form. But when it's healthy, it's just slightly rose-colored glasses, just enough for you to say dream big and feel inspired or ambitious, but not so much that you're blind to who you really are or what other people need and feel.
And it was interesting. One of the things that when you lose a spouse, when you get a divorce, and you're like hanging on to your self-worth, and I know that a lot of my listeners have been in that position. That's a time when it's probably good to be a little narcissistic, huh?
Absolutely. Where, in the sense of, again, we're talking, a lot of people react to and think this is sort of an oxymoron, healthy narcissism. Again, this is just well established in the research, and all you want to, it's not a realistic self-image. It's slightly tinged to the overly positive. And again, the vast majority of people in our world who are happy and healthy seem to have this. When you're moving on from a divorce or some great loss, it helps to feel a little bit special. It helps you so that you can keep going. It helps you so you can feel a healthy sense of entitlement. That I'm entitled to a little special attention now because I've been through hell. People who struggle with egoism often paradoxically they often do the reverse, where they tend to disappear because they're afraid of being a burden. So the more trouble they're in or the more they're struggling, the less entitled they feel.
That's interesting that as you're saying that, I'm thinking about people I've known who have gotten a divorce, and like and you're absolutely right, there's a point in time where you think, wow, they were never like this before, and then that seems to settle down after a while.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely, and that's normal. Think of that as kind of a spike in narcissism, and then people come just enough to get them through, and then people come back down to earth. You see this when somebody is sick. If they don't struggle with egoism, if they're fairly self-confident as they get sick or they become elder, then they may slip into a more demanding state, and eventually they settle back down. But I think this is a fairly common way of coping. Where we want to work, what listeners are probably most concerned about and want to know about is, what is disordered narcissism? Pathological narcissism is, again, when people become so dependent on that special feeling that they turn aside love and relationships, and they demonstrate what I call triple E. That's exploitation, doing whatever it takes in order to get their needs met, no matter what the cost to others, entitlement, acting as if the world and other people owe them, and empathy impairments, which is they become so blind to the needs and feelings of others in their pursuit of their high, if you will, that they're blocked in their empathy. That's what I call triple E. That's really the core of pathological narcissism, whether it's extroverted, introverted, or communal.
You say something, and you were talking about in Rethinking Narcissism about your mother, and what you said was you wondered if she had always been a narcissist and you hadn't recognized it. And it was a question my sister-in-law and I used to talk about with regards to my sister, because before she was diagnosed, and she's a paranoid schizophrenic. That was her diagnosis, and my sister-in-law and I used to have a conversation with her, and we would think that it was a normal conversation. And then at some point we'd realize that the conversation had fallen off the cliff. And the scary thing that we used to laugh about was we didn't know how long we had been in the land of crazy before we realized it. And so I wonder, how is it that, like, when you're in that position, like, how do you know if somebody is narcissistic, and can you get lulled into a relationship like that, where you're not even realizing the 3 E's are happening?
People get lulled into it all the time. One reason is that early on in a relationship, you may not see the 3 E's. That's why in Rethinking Narcissism, I try to identify what I call early warning signs that are really based on why anybody and how anybody becomes extremely narcissistic. You may not see it. Most people don't continue to date someone and fall in love with an absolute jerk. If it was that black and white, right? Everybody, most of us would just turn tail and flee. What happens is, even somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder, and this is what gets so confusing for everyone, we know from the research that there's healthy and unhealthy narcissism, and they coexist, and they do not rise and fall in perfect step with one another. And so especially if you run into a charismatic, outgoing, really sociable narcissist, you can be swept off your feet. They can be very charming, put you on a pedestal, which, boy, that feels great. And even if you struggle with egoism, they'll insist on you being on a pedestal. You may not have a choice. And so what happens is, because people who have narcissistic personality disorder are uncomfortable depending on others, being close. That is, they're scared that if they truly open up to someone and rely on them emotionally, that they won't be there for them. The technical term is insecure attachment. That as they get closer, they become more narcissistic over time, because that is their way of coping with their attachment and security, that fear of depending on others. And to the extent that you can't depend on people, you will depend on feeling special.
Oh, that's interesting. As you're saying that, I'm thinking about people I know, and there's one person in particular that I'm thinking of, and I'm like, oh, now I get him, you know?
Yeah.
It's interesting how you're saying it, but you know what, Craig, we need to take a break, and when we come back, what I'd like to talk about is, what do we do if we're in that kind of a relationship? So everybody stay close. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour.
Are you one of those women who lived the first part of your life as a really good girl? That is, you did all the right things and followed all the so-called rules for women? I was like that too. But have you noticed that once you passed 40, you have less patience for those rules? Maybe you even think that the rules really don't make sense for you anymore. Maybe they never did and you just didn't realize it. Do you want to go where other recovering good girls meet to inspire each other and support their new empowered selves? Then join me, Annmarie Kelly, and some very fabulous victorious women. We're on Facebook at the Victorious Woman Project. So go to facebook.com/Victorious Woman Project. I'll talk to you there.
Welcome back to the Friday Happy Hour. I'm Annmarie Kelly, and we're here with Dr. Craig Malkin. We're talking about narcissism and his book, Rethinking Narcissism. So, Craig, if you get sort of lulled into that kind of a relationship, what are some of the early warning signs that you have that can tip us off so we don't get in too far too fast?
One of the things that you want to, again, a lot of times what people are looking for is someone loud, or they chest-thumping braggarts, or they boastful. And as I said in Rethinking Narcissism, I explained there's many different kinds. What you really want to look for is that anybody, no matter what form the narcissism takes, the more narcissistic they are, the more afraid they are to depend on other people. That is truly, authentically, emotionally depend on them. Turn to them when they're sad or scared or lonely, and have some faith that they can be there for them and care about them in a mutual way. There are predictable ways of dodging that kind of dependency or vulnerability. Those are what I call the tells, or the early warning sign. One of the most common and straightforward is emotion phobia. So if, people who are extremely narcissistic, precisely because they're not comfortable with their needs or feelings, as soon as they start to feel anything intensely, they may shut down, they may get angry, and that includes if you feel something. They become uncomfortable around it. So a great example, I had a client whose girlfriend, whenever he started talking about his mother and that she was getting ill, and I think she actually had cancer, she couldn't handle the intensity of it. She would turn away and start cleaning. But a real telltale sign is these are the people, everybody knows someone like this, you're talking to about your kids, say, and I went through hell on Friday, and I just wanted to scream, I was so upset, and this is the person who says, I have no idea what you're talking about, I've never felt like that before with my kids. Right? That's emotion phobia in a way of feeling superior, like, I would never go through those kinds of feelings. But it can take that subtler form of veering away and not being able to stick with feelings. Another really common one is something I call playing emotional hot potato. This is when somebody feels insecure, they say or do things to make you feel insecure because they don't want to feel that way themselves. So another example, I had a client who was applying to graduate school. Her boyfriend had no idea what he was going to do. That was clear. But rather than talk to her about it, he got rid of his feelings. He played hot potato. I don't want to feel insecure and unsure of myself. Here, you take it. By looking over her shoulder while she applied to these schools and offering opinions like, well, that might be overshooting. Are you sure you want to do that one? So you can see this doesn't have to be overt abuse or even abusive. It can be very subtle, but what you see are these strategies to avoid feeling vulnerable in any way in a relationship, and that's just two of them.
Do they think about this in advance, or is it like an automatic, like a safety valve thing, like their brain makes those connections that fast?
It's very fast. It's very quick. You want to think of it that's why I even use the term phobia. It's rare for any of us, including somebody who's extremely narcissistic or has a narcissistic personality disorder, that they're consciously making efforts to do these things. It happens very quickly. They feel a flash of fear or a flash of loneliness or insecurity, and out comes this defense, this way of coping, of, say, dumping the feeling on you through hot potato or changing the subject because they're being emotionally phobic. They're automatic ways of coping that have developed over time, and when they become entrenched enough, that's when you start to see somebody who has a personality disorder.
It's kind of fascinating work. How long did it take you to do all this?
To write the book or to
do all the research? Yeah, no, to do all the research for the book.
As I said, the research started by growing up with my mother. From there, I did training with one of the foremost experts on narcissism in the world. He wrote a number of books. That was in my advanced training, and I just sort of slipped into it more and more and became fascinated both with self-esteem and narcissism and personality disorder. So I did my advanced training in that. So if you include all of that and the writing of the book...
Oh, years and years.
Yeah, years and years. The book itself was short in terms of research because I'd already done it. I'd already done it all.
So... Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, if one of your questions was, what do people do in the relationship? One of the things I would recommend, because it's free, is that you go to the narcissismtest.com, and a lot of times people have trouble spelling the narcissismtest.com. So you can just go to www.drcraigmalkin.com and click on the test tab. And I have a brief online version that gives you research-backed feedback and tips afterwards. And one of the things you want to look at is if you struggle with egoism, that may be one way of understanding why you keep slipping into these relationships without realizing it.
Ah, that's a good one. Yep. And you know what? There's something else. And before I have to let you go, I wanted to ask you this question. And it was something that I was so fascinated with because you said that we are genetically predisposed with certain traits, but we don't come into the world with a clean slate because of this genetic predisposition, but that narcissists are not born, they're made, that it's nurture over nature. How are we raising narcissistic children?
The core of unhealthy narcissism, you want to think of it again. If you're afraid that when you're sad or scared or lonely that you can't turn to people, this is I go into great depth on Rethinking Narcissism. I don't use the term attachment insecurity, but that's what we're talking about. that if you're afraid to do that, you have to turn to feeling special. So in various ways, either by feeling like the most smartest person in the room, the most entitled, or the most misunderstood, or the most helpful person in the room, all those varieties, different ways of doing it, instead of turning to people. So as long as we're doing our job as parents, where we teach kids about feelings, our own, and how to talk about them and name them, how to ask for help, why it's okay to ask for help, how to understand what's going on inside another person. This is how you help someone develop a secure love, a secure attachment. And you cannot, they don't go together. Someone can't have narcissistic personality disorder or be extremely narcissistic and be securely attached at the same time. By definition, we know that, because we know in the research, the more narcissistic someone is, the more they devalue love in relationships. That's insecure attachment. It's called dismissive. It's a particular kind. So as long as we're doing our jobs where we're teaching kids about relationships and feelings, and there are ways, I actually go through 8 keys of raising a self-confident, caring child in Rethinking Narcissism to help people with this. As long as we're doing that, we're not going to crank out narcissistic kids, even if they have that predisposition. I don't have time to go into it, but there was a 20-year longitudinal study that looked at early precursors for unhealthy narcissism. And the only kids who turned out to develop extremely narcissistic in the end were the ones whose parents raised them in a way that left them insecure.
Well, Dr. Craig Malkin, I know you have a client coming in, and I hate to let you go, but I have to go and you have to go. But this was fun, and I'm so glad you came to Happy Hour today.
Well, thank you for having me on a happy hour. I'm very happy to be on a happy hour.
Oh, that's a good. I'll have to have you back for happy hour another time.
Please do. Please do.
How can my listeners get a copy of Rethinking Narcissism, and they can get the test from your website? Dr. Craig Malkin.
Anywhere books are sold. If you want to support your local bookstore, chances are it's going to have it because it was sold everywhere. If you just want to go onto my website, the www.drcraigmalkin.com, CraigMalkin as in Nancy. Also, I'm easy to find. And just click on book. I have the various versions of it, even in different languages. It's being translated into about 9 languages at this point. And so if somebody prefers to read in German, you can do that, for example.
Wow. Well, listen, Dr. Craig Malkin, thanks for coming to Happy Hour. Have a great weekend.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much for having me on it, Annmarie.
Oh, I'm glad you did. Thank you. And to you Victory Chicks and you guys, I have to tell you about next week's show. I usually don't tease my upcoming shows, but I'm so excited about this one. And that's because Lorraine Rinaldi, and you probably know her from different radio shows, most recently Cucina Kitchen. Well, Lorraine's going to be here to interview me about the 5-year marriage, and it won't just be me. It'll be me and my sweetie Joseph. And Lorraine's read what I've been writing for the past 8 months. And she's fabulous to come in and do the interview. So that's next week. And I hope you have a good weekend. I have a friend coming over tonight. Tomorrow I'll be with my Notre Dame alums. And if any of you are listening, I'm looking forward to seeing you and seeing you at school. And that's where our luncheon is. And it'll be good to see you. And you know what Dr. Craig Malkin was saying about a little narcissism being good? Well, I think that might be the secret to Michelle Pfeiffer's success, because she said, this is her quote, "I don't know if it's naivete or just narcissism, but I start out with this notion that I can do anything. It's not until I get into it that I realize that what I've thrown myself into, and then I will do anything not to humiliate myself. And that, I think, is the secret to my success." Sounds familiar to me. How about you? Listen, thanks for coming today. I'm glad that you did. Have a victorious weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. Chenzan.
Thanks for listening to this Friday Happy Hour. Make sure you subscribe, rate and review today's show. And join us again next week for the Friday Happy Hour with Annmarie Kelly.